You're listening to Wake Up with Patti Katter, where we're overcoming trials with triumphs. Now, here's your host, Patti Katter.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again this week. Today I have Eli Crane with me on the show. Eli is best known for being a brave Navy SEAL, and he owns a company called Bottle Breacher. Welcome to the show, Eli.
Patti, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really interested in your story because not only were you a fast-paced Navy SEAL, I heard you're running for Congress or something, so we'll get into that too later. But if you could tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. Stayed here for a couple years, and then my parents moved us down to Yuma, Arizona. My dad is still a pharmacist to this day, and so he got a good offer down in Yuma, Arizona, and so we grew up, down in the desert, one of the hottest places in the country. And so, I spent the next probably 16 years there. Left when I was about 18 years old, 19 years old, going to college, just starting college, and then transferred up to the University of Arizona, spent a couple years there, and then joined the Navy. Joined the Navy from there. So I grew up, in Arizona, and we're back here now.
Mm-hmm. So what in the world made you want to join the Navy? And then did you think that you were going to go to be a Navy SEAL, or what was the scoop there?
The reason I wanted to join the Navy the only reason was because of the SEAL teams. And so, I definitely looked into the Army and the Marine Corps. Those were the other two primary ones I was looking at, and I was looking at their special programs as well. And the SEAL teams were something that definitely attracted me, and so I ended up going that direction. But the bad thing about going that direction, for those young men that are looking possibly doing something like that, is that if you don't make it through SEAL teams, into the SEAL teams, then you go out to a ship. Whereas in the Marine Corps or the Army, you can go to another combat unit, an infantry unit, etc. And so that was a pretty painful lesson for me. I knew it going in, but I just really wanted so badly to become a SEAL that I was like, I'll risk it, and I'll risk spending multiple years on a ship. And I ended up getting just that.
Mm-hmm. So when you were younger, what did you want to do? Because you mentioned you did go to college before you joined the Navy.
Yeah. So I honestly, like a lot of young men, I wanted to play sports. And then I really wanted to play football in college, and unfortunately I came to the hard reality that I wasn't good enough to do that. And so I started looking at, but I also always wanted to be in the military as well. And so I grew up in Yuma, and there's a Marine Corps Air Station in Yuma. And so a lot of the young men and women that I looked up to when I was younger were Marines. And so that was something that my parents always taught me and my brothers. Hey, these people are special. They do something that is so much bigger than themselves. And, that was always really attractive to me. And so when I got the opportunity, well, I think a lot of people have the opportunity, but I was going to college at the University of Arizona, and then 9/11 happened. And that was my senior year, the beginning of my senior year that started. And so I actually ended up dropping out of school the very next week and enlisting in the Navy.
Wow. What did your parents think of that?
I think I called both of them. I let them know because, I definitely wanted to respect my parents and, their wishes and their support in helping me with school. And so I don't know that they were super surprised, but I think that they were definitely a little concerned, as any parent would be, especially at that time, that day and time in American history. So, but they supported me the entire time that I was in the military, and my little brother, did the same thing, and he was at the Naval Academy at the time, and they were supportive of him as well. And so I think that I'm grateful to have had parents that understand that freedom isn't free, and that oftentimes you can't, ask other people to go do what, you're not willing to support your own children in doing. So, they were supportive of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that must have been a little hard, especially maybe for the mom.
Yeah.
Probably for the dad too, just sometimes they don't vocalize it, I know.
Right.
So tell me about you going into the Navy. You're going through regular boot camp. Is that what you do in the Navy too, compared to the other branches?
Yeah. You go through regular boot camp. I think some people probably and accurately, will joke around that Navy boot camp is like boot camp light compared to, some of your Army and your Marine Corps boot camps that I think are intended to be a little bit more physical. And I honestly would have preferred that as opposed, because that's exactly what I was targeting. That's what I was working towards with SEAL training. And that was the thing that attracted me about SEAL training, was that a lot of the literature that I read said that it was the toughest training in the Department of Defense. And so, boot camp was really, really, like for most people, is really tough, especially because, obviously they take all of your freedoms, your liberties, your independence. Any individuality is stripped from you from the moment you get off that bus. But then for me, it was hard too, because I joined the military to fight and to be trained to fight. And in Navy boot camp, that's really not what Navy boot camp is about. It's about teaching you discipline, and, you spend more time folding your clothes and folding your, making your bed and, standing at attention than learning the things that I wanted to learn. And it is what it is. It's, it's part of the process. And, I think it's good, good for you. And it was definitely good for me.
Mm-hmm. So I heard that Navy SEAL training is pretty much I know everybody's going to be listening from all different branches, but I heard it's the toughest. And I know my husband was Marine. He was in recon, so he trained a little bit with Navy SEALs, and I've heard about some of that training. In particularly, the one that freaks me out the most is when you're doing the water training and you have your hands tied behind your back and all this crazy stuff. What was the hardest part of training for you?
Yeah, no, and I got a lot of respect for, whether you're Ranger, SF, Recon. I actually know several Recon guys that came over and went through SEAL training and became SEALs. I know several of them. The hardest part for me was Hell Week. I actually had to do it twice, and it's just 5.5 days of, no sleep and just getting the crap kicked out of you the entire time. So I think it's like 120 hours, pretty much continuous training. You get about 3 hours total the entire 5.5 days, and so it's not like you get 3 hours a night. You get 3 hours total, and that's really difficult. It's hard to even really describe it to people, because, and you're not sitting there playing patty cake or writing essays. You're getting destroyed, and they continually are trying to keep you. It's designed to make everybody fail, and then see how you do when you fail. Because a lot of guys that show up to training like that have typically been good at everything that they've done, and a lot of them aren't familiar with failure and what that feels like. And they use the Pacific Ocean to constantly keep you pretty close to being hypothermic, cold. It's one thing to be tired. It's another thing to be cold and tired. It's a completely other thing to be cold, wet, and tired. And, a lot of it takes place in your mind. And I think one of the biggest things that gets a lot of people, and it almost got me the first time I went through, I made it through Hell Week before I failed out of training. And what the human mind instinctively wants to do when you get faced with something like that's 5.5 days and it's that brutal, it's that difficult, is you want to try and eat the elephant all in one bite. And you start thinking towards Friday, and you start thinking, wait a minute, Patty, I've never been this cold. I've never been this tired. I've never been this miserable. And it's only Tuesday. How am I going to make it to Friday? And so, interestingly, my parents tried to teach me from, the time I was little, that you eat the elephant one bite at a time. But when you're getting hammered in a storm like that, it's really tough to, go back to that and be like, okay, I'm just going to break this up into small pieces. And, I did a much better job of that my second time. But, the first time that I failed out of training, like I said, I made it through Hell Week, but I was very immature. And, you probably, if you knew me at the time, you probably wouldn't have thought, oh, this is a really immature young man, but they're looking for a different level of maturity, the type of maturity that will put your teammate, and somebody in your boat crew, and somebody in your platoon, before yourself when things are very uncomfortable. Because the natural human response when things get chaotic and scary and overbearing is that the natural human response is to become really selfish and to focus on ourselves, and that's exactly what I did. And and so that was one reason that I'm glad that I failed out of training, and that they actually performance dropped me from training and said, hey, you're obviously tough, but we need the best of the best here, and you're not measuring up to it. So we're going to recommend that you go out to the fleet for 2.5 years or 1 year. And it took me 2.5 years to get back, but ended up being a really good experience for me, because not only did I have to eventually, I didn't have to, but I decided to take ownership of that failure and be like, instead of blaming other people, which is also really common for us to want to do, I had to, take a look at it and been like, hey, no, this is on you 100%. You screwed this up. If you would have showed up with a better attitude, if you would have showed up with more preparation, you wouldn't have wound up in this spot. And so it took me a while to take ownership and accountability of that failure, but I'm actually glad I did, because I think too many adults and too many kids, it takes us, some people never learn how to take accountability and ownership, of their failures and, their life. And, it was a good wake up call for me. And, it definitely started to change my thinking and even my behavior, dealing with my failures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And it makes it harder when we don't admit our mistakes and move on. So you were in the Navy for 16 years, correct?
No, I was close, but yeah, I was in the Navy for 13 years.
Oh, 13. Okay. Probably felt like 20.
Right.
So after you ended up getting out of the Navy, what did you do?
So, my wife and I started a small business called Bottle Breacher. I actually started that while I was still in the Navy. There was about 2 years of overlap time there, but, yeah, so, we started this business while I was still in the Navy, while I was still on active duty. And, we got an opportunity to, go on Shark Tank, interestingly enough, and I think this was a God thing completely, but, right as I was getting out of the military, in October of 2014 was my last month in the military, and our Shark Tank episode aired in November of 2014, so like 1 month later. So it was a pretty interesting transition, going from being in the SEAL teams to kind of getting thrown into the deep end of entrepreneurship. Going on that show, because when you go on that show, entrepreneurship is hard already, but when you go on that show, at the time they had about 12 million viewers, and so we went to bed the day before Shark Tank and we would make about 135 bottle breachers on a good day. And then when we woke up the next day, we had to make 60,000 bottle breachers, and we had about 20,000 emails to answer, and a lot of pissed off customers. Like we were definitely, grateful for that opportunity and all the support and all the sales that came in. But because we're a made in the USA company, we don't just call China, or we don't call Singapore or Taiwan or Vietnam and say, hey, can you send us like 60,000, units? We make them. And so, it was definitely an interesting transition. And, and on top of it, I was doing it with my spouse, which is one of the hardest things you can ever do, is work with your spouse. So it was a real eye-opening experience for me. And it was interesting, because I think God kind of used that situation to expose a lot of the problems in our marriage, and even, a lot of our own personal problems that needed to be dealt with, so that we could be better spouses towards one another. And it took a while, and it was very difficult. But I talk about it because I think that if you figure something out, and you don't share it with other people, if you go through something difficult and you don't share it with other people, you're not really being what we call in the SEAL teams a team guy. You're not using the knowledge, even if you have to expose a little shame or a little something that you're not necessarily proud of, to help somebody else out there. Because I know that there's people that listen to your show, Patty, that are struggling in their marriage as well. And whether they're running a business together or not, it really doesn't matter. And so, that was some of the cool things that came out of Bottle Breacher, not just, being able to provide for my family in a way that I never was, exposed to as a kid, but more importantly, it taught, through the trials and through the storms, it taught me how to be a better husband.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, yeah, because thinking about it, you and your spouse were separated probably quite a bit when you were a Navy SEAL, traveling and all that. And you had, that adrenaline going and then you come home and then to be thrown into a whole nother atmosphere was definitely probably very challenging.
Yeah, no, it really was. And that's one of the things that, we have a really, I'm sure it was pretty similar in recon, but we had about a 95% divorce rate in the SEAL teams. So the fact that we even made it through that together, was a blessing in itself. But then being able to, grow a business together, has pretty equally abysmal ratings when it comes to keeping marriages together, starting, when you and your spouse start a business together. And so I'm grateful that my wife and I have been able to work through it. And keep our marriage. It's stronger than ever. And I definitely want to point out that, the reason that it is stronger than ever is because we put God at the center of it. And if we didn't do that, there would be no way that, I don't even know if we'd still be together, but no, it's been a blessing. And I like to share that with people because I know there's a lot of people out there with some of the same questions that we had, some of the same frustrations that we had. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of us look in the wrong places.
Mm-hmm, I could see that. So when I met my husband, he was just getting out of the Marine Corps. He had a 10-year break in service. He was a policeman, and then he was in the Army post 9/11. So I can relate, though, to the part where he was deployed for like 15 months to Iraq. He had a tiny little R&R in there, but I know that even when he came back from that situation, he was different. I was different. It was a lot of crazy work.
Yeah.
Now tell me about, and I'm kind of going fast because you have a lot to your story, Eli. But you went from being in college and we went to talk about your Navy SEAL experience a little bit and then Bottle Breacher. And I heard you're running for Congress.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, we are. We're, it was early last year, my wife and I, we decided that we needed to just get flexible in our life. And we had decided to make some big moves in our life. And we were asked if we would consider running for office, by some folks that do this type of stuff every single day. We had some real good conversations with the folks about it and said, hey, look, I'm never going to be a yes man. I'm not a politician. I never wanted to be a politician, but I recognize our country is in a lot of trouble. And I know that a lot of other veterans have noticed the same thing, which is why you have so many veterans running right now. I'm willing to go serve in that capacity. And, with all of my, negative attributes or weaknesses or whatever you want to call them. And so we decided to give it a shot. Here we are. We launched our campaign in July 20th. We're running for U.S. Congress here in Arizona in CD2. It's the largest geographical district in the country that's not like a standalone, district where a state only has one district. But, it's interesting. We got a lot of cool cities in this district. We got Flagstaff, we've got Sedona, we've got the Grand Canyon, we've got Payson and Prescott, and a lot of cool places here in Arizona. And it's a big rural district. And at the end of the day, I was just tired of complaining about it. And so I wanted to see if I could be a part of the change that I wanted to see. And like I said, I have a lot of weaknesses. I know that I'm not a politician. I know I don't. There's a lot of things about this world that I'm learning about every single day. But, I think that Americans are tired of the status quo. I think they're tired of the same old suits and, the career politicians that, have become masters at lying to your face, telling you one thing, telling you they're going to fight for you, and then selling you out the moment they get an opportunity. And so here we are. We're doing great. We've actually set back-to-back fundraising records in this district. And that's something that's pretty cool because it's usually the number one indicator. As sad as that is, it's usually the number one indicator that people look at, because most of us don't want to part with our hard-earned money. And so if people are willing to part with their money to support you, usually that's a good indicator that you're on the right track. And the cool thing, Patty, is that, these records that I'm talking about that we've set here, they're not with it's not like big donor dollars or like PAC money or special interest. The average donation to our campaign has been around like $35-40. And so it's been really cool to just see that the people are, they're excited about, different type of candidates that have, lived lives where they've actually gone and done stuff and served and sacrificed and started small businesses and, not necessarily, your typical career politician. So it's been good, but I say that and knowing that I may never become a congressman. I'm very well aware of that. But one thing I wasn't okay with was sitting around and just complaining about. I've always been the type of guy, hey, if you want to, if swing for the fences, go big, and don't be afraid to fail, because you get into something like this, there's only 435 congressmen, men and women in the U.S. And so it's this is big league. A lot of focus, a lot of attention, and a lot of money gets thrown into these races. And so I think a lot of the things that God's guided and directed me through up until this point in my life have prepared us for what we're doing now. And so we'll see what He has at the end of this, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to go try and serve again.
I think that's amazing. And I think you would be an amazing congressman. I know I would vote for you. Now tell me. Yeah, definitely. We've talked about all these experiences just kind of on the surface, but what would you say one of the hardest obstacles have been in your life, and how did you overcome that obstacle?
Oh man, there's been so many, Patty. One of the, I talked a little bit about learning to work with my spouse. That was one of the hardest. One of the earlier, I think when I was even less mature was when my parents got divorced when I was 17 years old. And that was a really tough thing for me, because it totally blindsided me. Didn't see it coming. And, watching your family get torn apart, that's one of the hardest things I think anybody can go through. And, just bouncing back from that, that was one of the hardest things that I've ever gone through, just watching, the impact that it had on my family. And then, as a young man, you always want mentorship, and you always want. One of my favorite authors is a guy named John Eldridge, and he writes a book called Wild at Heart. And he says that the number one question that every young man has is this: do I have what it takes? And usually that in regards to a young man, that question can only be answered. Masculinity can only be passed down through masculinity. And so, it was tough for me because, once once my father was no longer, living with us, it really rocked my world, and it definitely left a lot of questions unanswered. But it's a much bigger part of my story. I don't think we have time to go into all of it, but that was one of the hardest things for me, is to bounce back from that and just, realize that, stuff like that, it doesn't have to define you. You can go on, you can rally, you can go for big things, even if things, in your life go sideways. And that's something that, again, another reason I like to talk about my failures. Like, let me just go through some real quick, Patty, real quick. I was fired from Baskin Robbins and Dairy Queen in the same year in high school. And in both cases, I deserved it. The first time I went through SEAL training, I didn't make it through. I already talked about that. The first time I went through sniper school, I failed. I didn't make it through that. The first time I sat down with an investor for my business, I failed. I didn't make, he didn't invest in my business. And it's just like, I like to talk about failure because there's a lot of people that have been trained to see failure as a stop sign, when the people that I know in life that are the most successful, they see it as a detour sign. Okay, I screwed that up. Take accountability, take ownership of it, but then find another way around. Don't give up. Dust yourself off, figure it out, get back in the game, right? And so, the divorce was a hard one for me. Working with my spouse was a hard one for me. Those were two things that were hard for me to deal with. And then, I dealt with a lot of anger and rage when I left the service. I think I had a lot of survivor's guilt going on, and then I had some other stuff going on. And as a guy who went immediately into business, and I didn't want it, former Navy SEAL, I didn't want people to know that how much I was struggling and how much I was hurting on the inside. And, it was something that I tried to keep bottled up inside. And, that was something that was tough for me to get through as well. And I actually, I went to an event, I sought some help, and it changed my life. And so, for any vets out there, or anybody in general watching this show, that's struggling with, issues, don't be afraid to go get help, man. We all need help. No shame in that at all.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. And what I love about you opening up to on the show is I've met a lot of people who've run for different offices, and I know how hard it is when you have the opponent just trying to throw dirt at you and trying to bring up past behaviors.
Yeah.
And so when you're just really transparent, those kind of people can never win.
Yeah.
Because you're telling everybody, like, this is what I did. We're all human. We all screw up, or we all have problems. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something I said from the start. If I'm going to do this, I'm just going to be real and authentic and open. And if the cool thing, Patty, is that I'm offering to serve and to represent people. And if they decide, hey, he's got too much baggage, we don't want him to represent us, that, like I said, that's cool with me. What's not cool with me is knowing that I could possibly do something about it and sitting on the sidelines and complaining. That's not okay with me. So for all other candidates out there that might listen or hear this, I mean, that is the way to take a lot of stress off your plate. It's the best way to run a race, when you're not focused on the outcome, but you're focused on your posture.
Mm-hmm. Amen. That's true. And I think that's what all Americans are looking for right now. All of the people who listen to my show that I've heard from so far have said, we want to see some changes in America. And we all know that the biggest change that can be made are by authentic people who really care about our country, and not those out there who are just hungry for greed or attention.
Right. It's a crazy world, man. I totally get the quest and the desire for like power and money and all the things that we chase after foolishly as human beings. I get it. I've been there. I've done it. It's just such a weird world, man. It's like, politics is such a nasty world. Like, it would be, if I was chasing after those things, it would be the last world that I would go to, because it's like, it's different, I think, in so many ways than so many other ways that you could chase after this stuff, just because it's like, it is nasty, man. And it is full of snakes and pit vipers. And, and that's why I would have never done this if I didn't feel like it was a calling. I would have never done this if my wife wasn't 100% on board with it. And so, it is what it is. I think we're where God wants us to be, regardless of that means that we become, we serve in Congress or not. But, sometimes I think that you just have to say, just raise your hand and be like, yep, I'll go, I'll serve, and then let the cards fall where they do. But I think, like, going back to what I was talking about with failure, I think, you get good at anything you practice. And if you practice letting your fear control you, because I'm afraid all the time, but I don't let it control me. I just say, okay, it's just part of this journey. It's part of, either becoming successful or what I would say, becoming who God created you to be. There's always going to be a level of fear and anxiety. If you let it control you, then, that will define you. But if you say, okay, it's just a part of it, I'm not going to let it control me. I'm going to push through. I'm going to fight through. You have a much better chance of either becoming successful or, like I would say, becoming who God created you to be.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Wow, Eli, thank you so much for being on the show. Could you please share your social media links with our listeners?
Yeah, thank you. So our campaign website, if you guys want to learn more about me, is eli4arizona.com. That's Eli, F-O-R, Arizona.com. And then on social media, I'm Eli Crane _CEO on all my social media.
Excellent. Eli, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything that you would like to add before we wrap it up today?
I don't think so. I just think that, one thing that I like to talk about with people is too many of us start thinking about our legacy far too late in life. And one of the best drills one of the best things that I think I could give anybody listening to is, like, think about your funeral, think about who's going to show up, think about who's not going to show up, think about what are they going to say about you, and then think about what you want people to say about you and work backwards from there. Like, it's kind of like visualization. We used to do this type of thing in the SEAL teams all the time, like dry firing, shooting, long range shooting, whatever it is. But if we did that with our funeral and our legacy and what we wanted to leave this earth behind, the legacy we wanted to leave behind, and then we work backwards from there, I think it's a lot easier for you to start making the right decisions, building the right relationships, so that one day at your funeral, because we all have one, right? One day at our funeral, the right people show up. The haters don't show up, and they're saying the things about you that you wanted to leave behind and that you wanted to be remembered for. And so, I would say that's a fun little, maybe not a fun little drill, but something that I think that if more of us did, we would wind up living more purpose-driven lives.
Yes, I agree. Definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on my show today. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And I hope you all just have an enjoyable day. If you've missed any of my podcasts, go back and listen. Eli, thank you and good luck on your journey. I can't wait to maybe have you on. I don't know if you're allowed to come on to my show while you're you can come on my show while you're in Congress, right? Like, come on.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's do it. We'll reconvene. Hopefully,
okay, thank you, Patti. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you have an amazing shot. I can't wait to see where you go. You take care.
All right. You too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Please head over to pattikatter.com for the latest updates on Patti, her talk show, and what she's up to. You can also find her on Amazon TV and Roku, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Patti Katter. Until next time.